Good morning, everybody. My name is Katie Belfus. I'm the Outreach Programs Director with the Wisconsin Wetlands Association, and we're delighted to have you with us today for this wetland coffee break on the 10th of July. For those of you not familiar with Wisconsin Wetlands Association, we are a statewide, nonprofit, nonpartisan conservation organization. We help people and communities care for wetland. We do lots of education, outreach, political work, policy influence, helping to help folks at all levels care for wetlands wherever they are in Wisconsin. We work with landowners, we work with local governments, we work with farmers, anybody who wants to care for wetlands to help solve the problems or generate the benefits that they want, we would like to work with them. So if you are not a member of our organization and you like what you see here today, we invite you to become a member of our organization, and we welcome you to that community. This Wetland Coffee Break is a newish program for us. It started during this COVID pandemic that is changing all of our lives in so many ways. And we come together, now we're doing it twice a month, to learn from our partners around the state, our friends and colleagues who have wetland knowledge to share with us all, so that we can keep the conversation about wetlands going and we can keep connected as a community. So we appreciate your being here with us today. As I said, we do it every couple of weeks. Next week we have Rory Pulaski from the Wisconsin DNR talking about frogs. We talk a lot about frogs in the spring when they're very noisy, but sometimes I've always wondered, you know, once they stop calling, what are they up to and where are they going and how is their life different from when they're mating? So we'll learn about that next week. Following that, we have Steve Gaffield on July 31st talking about wetland hydrology. So we're going to watch a little video this morning as part of Tracy's presentation that will give you a little intro to wetland hydrology. And if you're curious and want to learn more, we invite you to come back on the 31st to hear from Steve. If there's a particular topic or presenter you'd like to see us featuring here on the Wetland Coffee Break, please let us know. You can put something in the chat box or you can send an email to programs@wisconsinwetlands.org. Emily, who's our colleague and fearless back-end leader of this meeting this morning, has entered information about how to become a member in the chat box, as well as how to subscribe to our bi-weekly wetland news emails, which is the best way to learn about upcoming events and programs and happenings at the Wisconsin Wetlands Association. Just checking my list here to make sure. We will be using the chat box for questions. So if you have questions during the presentation or following the presentation, type them into the chat box. I will relay them to Tracy once he's done with his presentation and he'll give us an answer. Again, please keep yourself muted and keep your video off to keep things clear on the screen. And I believe that's it for all of my housekeeping. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my boss, Tracy Hames. He's been the executive director of the Wisconsin Wetlands Association since 2011. From 1989 to 2011, he was employed as a waterfowl biologist at the Yakama Nation Wildlife Resource Management Program and was the lead biologist in the Yakama Nation's Wetlands and Riparian Restoration Project in Washington State. He has a bachelor's degree in biology and environmental studies from Macalester College and a master's degree in natural resources from UW-Stevens Point. And he gives a great talk. So I'm glad to have him here with us today. Tracy, take it away.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for showing up on a Friday when it's a beautiful day and we could be outside splashing around in the mud. Hopefully today will be a fun presentation. It's a little bit of a retro presentation because we'll be talking about an area that we talked about for several years, a few years ago when there was a big mining issue going on in the Pinocchio Hills. So we'll be using some of those photos, and it's a little bit of experimental today because I'm going to be incorporating some video in my talk and kind of talking over as we're watching some of the videos. So bear with me if there's any faux pas or anything that goes on in relation to me managing the video end of this presentation. So today we'll be talking about the role of wetlands in the flow of water across our watersheds. And we'll start out, as I always do, with a really quick note of what are wetlands. A lot of people have misconceptions of what wetlands are. They think of wetlands as big open water places with cattails surrounding them and ducks and herons and things standing out in the shallow water. And that's true. Those are deep water marshes. Those are very important wetlands. But we have a whole host of different types of wetlands in Wisconsin, very diverse, and different types of wetlands depending on the habitat or the landscape features and what's going on with the hydrology. The thing you need to remember for this talk is wetlands are those places in between the areas that are always wet and the areas that are always dry. So it's in between ground. It's the zone where the land and water come together. And because of that, there are many different conditions. Some wetlands are closer to the always wet spectrum. Some are closer to the always dry spectrum. So let's talk a little bit. We'll show a short video here about how wetlands manage water. Some of you may have seen this video. This we put together, what, a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, and it's gotten a lot of attention. It actually was supposed to go on tour across the nation this year with the Wild and Scenic Film Festival, but that is now a virtual film festival, I understand, hosted by different towns. So maybe you'll see it if you watch that. So let's look at what we call our explainer video and talk a little bit about some of the basics, and then we'll elaborate on what we learn in this video in the rest of the talk.
Do you remember fishing with your grandpa, catching frogs at the water's edge? Some of these precious childhood memories of nature tie back to wetlands. Wetlands occur between the places that are always wet and the places that are always dry. Not only do they give us great memories, they also protect the health and safety of our communities. They reduce flood damages, help keep our waters clean, and ensure we have water to drink and use in our businesses. But the ability of wetlands to provide these benefits depends on how we use and manage our land and water. Across much of the state, the changes we have made to our landscape have disrupted this ability. And as a result, we're seeing more flood damages and water quality problems. The good news is that wetlands can be an important part of the solutions to these problems. And by understanding how wetlands work, we can begin the exciting process of restoring wetlands to help heal Wisconsin's waters. Because water flows downhill, we can't fix issues downstream if we don't fix problems upstream. So let's start at the top and look at how it's all connected. The watershed. A watershed is an area where all surface waters, lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands, drain to a shared body of water. But wetlands in different parts of a watershed manage water in different ways. Wetlands in the upper parts of a watershed form in low spots on the land. These wetlands capture, store, and slowly release runoff from rain and snowmelt. They may not always look like wetlands. They're wet in spring and dry by late summer, and often they don't even appear to be connected to streams or rivers, but they are critical. Here's how. Individually, these wetlands may be small, but they can be locally abundant. Together, they hold and manage a lot of water and literally slow the flow, allowing the water to soak into the ground. This reduces erosion and flood peaks and helps protect downstream roads and neighborhoods. Wetlands in the middle part of a watershed form along rivers and creeks, giving them room to swell during high water. They are most commonly known as floodplain wetlands. When floodwaters spread out across a floodplain, they slow down and spread out. Slower moving water has less erosion-causing energy, and water that can spread out means lower flood peaks downstream. Wetlands in the lower parts of a watershed form where rivers empty into larger bodies of water, especially lakes. Where rivers flatten out, the current disperses and the river drops its load of sediments and other material. This makes the water that enters the lake cleaner and clearer, which means better fishing, swimming, and boating. So are the wetlands near you healthy and abundant enough to support watershed health, or are they too damaged to do the work you need them to do? If you don't know the answer, you're not alone. But if you're concerned about water quality and flooding and care about fish and wildlife, encouraging your community to explore how local wetlands are or are not supporting watershed health is a great place to start. Working together, we can use wetlands as solutions in our communities. And at the same time, we can ensure that our kids and grandkids create the same treasured childhood memories we hold dear.
All right. Well, that woman can really draw fast, can't she? So we've been really happy with that video, and it's gotten a lot of use, as we say. And so today we'll be talking about how wetlands, just like the video said, how wetlands help manage, especially runoff and the waters that flow across our watersheds. And we'll use an example of a watershed that's located way up in the northern part of the state. If you see on the right-hand side, that red dot just south of the city of Ashland, this is the Bulgus Creek watershed is what we'll be looking at today. And on the left map, it's that big, it's inside that big donut, that red donut. And this is a watershed that's up at the top of the Pinocchi Hills. And the Pinocchi Hills, one of the red lines on the left map is the peak of the south ridge. There's two ridges going from southwest to northeast. And they're at the top of the ridges are about at, I think, about 1,400 foot elevation, and they drop down to Lake Superior. They flow north generally. And so they're dropping about 800 feet in a pretty short distance, which means is they're pretty steep watersheds. So the water has to drop from a high elevation down to a low elevation in a pretty quick area. And when you do that, when you require water to drop that fast, at that distance, at a short distance, you end up often having erosion problems and things like that. You can get a lot of fast moving water going down steep slopes. So the Bulgus Creek watershed is a Class 1 trout stream. It flows actually into the Tyler Forks River, which also then flows into the Bad River. All of it flows north onto the Bad River Reservation, and enters a place called the Kekagon Bad River Sloughs Complex Estuary, very large 16,000 acre complicated estuary that is, I think, the largest wild rice bed potentially on all the Great Lakes, certainly on Lake Superior. So very important area, very diverse area. And a lot of the talks that we have given over the years about the Bulgus and the Bad River watershed has been about how wetlands, especially in the upper watersheds, are important to helping maintain the values of areas like the Kekagon Sloughs and all the areas in between the top of the watershed at the lower part of the watershed. Now, our organization, Wisconsin Wetlands Association, is doing a lot of work in this area right now, working with a lot of folks, local governments, state governments, federal governments, Bad River tribes, and others, helping look at how wetlands can be incorporated as solutions to some of the water issues that are facing this region right now. Besides, a few years ago, having a large mine proposal in this area, recent proposals now are talking about potentially moving a large oil and natural gas pipeline up through this very steep landscape. And the other thing that's really been threatening this area recently is ever increasing very large storm events. So what we'll get now is a lot of storms moving in the summer that will literally park over this area and drop about a foot of rain overnight or in a short period. And that's really caused some challenges on this steep landscape, causing lots of road damage, lots of flooding, lots of erosion, et cetera, et cetera. So in the Bulgus Creek watershed, we'll use that as an example because it's in really good shape. And we'll get out and we'll look at some of the wetlands in the upper portions of the Bulgus and talk about how these wetlands are important to maintaining healthy flow of water down this steep landscape. So let's dive in and see what we've got here. At the top, just like in the video, we talked about ephemeral wetlands, those small, abundant wetlands in the top of the watershed. Bulgus Creek gets about between 200 and 300 inches of snow every winter. That's a lot of snow. And so when that snow melts, when the spring rains come, all that water has to go somewhere. And if there aren't places to hold that water, it'll rush downstream and cause erosion and gullying and all the problems that we see in so many places around our state. So you go up into the landscape there, it's forested, and you'll see an incredibly large amount of these very tiny little, what we call ephemeral wetlands or ephemeral ponds. And These are small features, but very abundant. I think the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission and the Bad River Tribe estimated about a 50% of the landscape in the upper Bulgus Creek watershed is composed of these types of wetlands. So let's go look at one. Let's take a walk through one of these wetlands. They're incredibly beautiful and incredibly diverse. And let's see what we see as we walk. In front of us is a cinnamon fern, one of my favorite ferns. You have some iris, you have shallow mud water areas, a lot of downed wood in these places, and just incredible diversity, many different species of sedges and mosses and different things. And you'll see here, I'm walking through this, one of these ephemerals, and as you walk forward, you start to get into mud. So this area, though this photo was taken in June, it's already starting to dry out. And the plants living in these ephemerals are adapted to conditions where it's really wet in the spring and then it dries out by late summer. You can see a lot of the ferns in the background. Some of them grow on little tussocks, on little humps to kind of keep themselves out of the water in the springtime. And just gorgeous, gorgeous places. Some of the wetlands hold water longer than others. Earlier we had Mandy Little talking about a lot of the biology of ephemeral wetlands, so seek out on our website that previous coffee break talk. Here's just a log that is so gorgeous. Look at the plants and the moss and the sedges and the things growing on this, and with the light filtering through the leaves on the tree. I get a tear in my eye when I'm out on these landscapes just to see the beauty and the diversity of what's out here. Also very important for amphibians, and the reason the amphibians like these so much is that they do dry out. So there are no fish in these wetlands. So it's a safe place if you're a frog or a salamander to lay your eggs, as long as you can get it done and get the babies off before they dry. There's Bill Hart and my daughter Allison. They were accompanying me the day we were out running around filming some of these wetlands. Oops, see, this is one of the, as I learn how to do this, there we go. Here's my next slide. The other really important component of these ephemerals, besides the diversity and the habitat and all the animals they support, is what we call how they manage snowmelt and spring precipitation. Now here's a small channel running through this steep landscape. You can see we're on a hillside right now, and there's a channel taking water down. This photo was taken in May a few years back. When I see a channel like this, I get really excited. And the reason is this is just a small, about, not even 2 foot wide channel at maybe 6 inches deep. And it's managing snow melt nicely down the way. Now this channel exists solely because there are abundant wetlands in this landscape that can capture the snow melt, hold on to it, and slowly release it. If those wetlands were removed, this would be a deep gully, maybe 6 feet deep. And in a lot of these landscapes that have been disturbed in this region, you will not see these types of features, these low energy channels. You'll see big gullies and all the water coming down because the wetlands have been lost or disturbed. So let's look at one of these channels. Here's a ephemeral wetland right next to the one that we were visiting. And remember the one we just saw, there was 6, 8 foot of water in there. This one is dry. And you can have one wetland right next to another. One will hold water maybe for a couple months. The next one may be dry within days after a rain or a snowmelt event. And it has to do with the soil and what's going on underneath it. In the Bulgus landscape, there's a lot of diversity. In some areas, the bedrock is very close to the surface. In other places, it may be 20, 25 feet deep. And so the water then, as it's ponded up in these ephemerals, slowly seeps down into the ground, and some of the extra runoff then will run down these small channels. And here's an example of one of these channels coming out of this ephemeral right here. And let's see if I can get this video started. So we're looking towards the ephemeral, and right in front of is this wet muddy thing is the channel flowing out of the ephemeral. You can see all the leaves and things. And I'm walking backwards, filming as I go, this very low energy channel coming out of this. It's some of the overflow water then just kind of seeps out of this ephemeral. and the channel becomes more and more diffuse. I'm turning around now looking downstream, and it's almost impossible just looking at the video to even see where the channel is because it's almost gone by this point. The water spreads out, it just soaks into the ground, and we're on a fairly steep slope going down to what up ahead is actually a beaver pond. And by the time you get to this point here, it's almost gone. The channel is just spread out and soaking into the ground. So these ephemerals hold the runoff, they soak it into the ground, and the water is still moving downstream, but it's moving oftentimes through the ground, underground as groundwater, entering places like this beaver pond maybe a month later as it slowly works its way down and is expressed as spring water coming in into the pond or the creek downstream. So very, very important to have these features that most people, especially in late summer, would walk right by and not even notice that they were wetlands. So let's go down a little bit and look at what's there. Below this area is a beaver pond. So you can't talk about the health of these watersheds up in this region without talking about beavers. Remember I told you Bulgus Creek is a Class 1 trout stream, which means it has naturally reproducing brook trout in a very healthy situation. And the reason Bulgus, one of the really important reasons Bulgus is so healthy is because it has abundant beavers in the upper watershed. And let's take a look. Here's an aerial photo taken of the area. The videos we just looked at were right about, you can see in the bottom right, there's the tire of this Cessna airplane right in front of the, kind of blocking the view. We were walking in the ephemerals, or pretty much right where that tire is. And we ended up looking at the flow going into this large beaver pond wetland on the right-hand side. And if you look above this big open water area with the dead trees in it, you'll see kind of a vertical line. That's another beaver dam above this dam. And then above that yet is another line. I don't know if I can point it out with my, if you can see this. There's a beaver dam here, there's a beaver dam here, there's a beaver dam down here. So the question is, why do beavers make dams? Beavers make dams because they need some depth of water to exist. They build lodges and they raise their young kind of in islands that they create out in the middle of these waters. And it's a safe place to be because there's a lot of things that like to eat beavers, especially bears and wolves. And there's plenty of bears and wolves in these here hills. And they also store their food in the winter underwater. So instead of finding lakes and things to live in, they create their own habitat. And so in an area like this, not only are they providing habitat so they can survive, but a lot of other animals, we'll talk about that in a minute. And what it's also doing is capturing all the runoff that comes off this landscape, holding onto it, allowing it to slow down, soak into the ground, and slowly be released into places like Bulgus Creek. And this area here with these beaver ponds actually flows kind of down to the bottom left and flows into Bulgus Creek. We'll talk about this wetland on the left here in a minute. That's one flows tippy-top right into the top of Bulgus Creek, where the ones on the right here are more ephemerals. And you'll notice at the top, there's the very tippy-top-most beaver wetland on the right side. Looks like it's full of plants. We'll talk about that in a second as well. So let's go down. We're going to visit just below this large beaver pond wetland here. Actually, just below it, there's a brand new beaver dam that formed this year. That's the first time I'd seen it, and I go up here every year. And so we'll take a look at that. This is it. Now, this is looking at a new beaver dam, looking upstream towards the lowest beaver dam that was on that aerial photo. What they do is there's a whole stair step of these things that it's just gorgeous if you're out in this kind of country. And so let's take a little walk on this beaver dam and see what we can see. You'll notice the trees that are dead because of the water still have a lot of their small needles and things on it. That's an indication that this is a very recent beaver dam. Some of the trees in the background where it's been inundated for longer have lost their smaller branches. So that's one way you can kind of tell the age of a beaver dam. How long it's been in is by looking at the dead trees in the waterways there. This actually was a really beautiful little wetland before they put the dam in. One of my favorite little spots. Now it's underwater. But you'll turn over and you'll see here's the dam itself. We'll talk in a minute about how they build their dams and the structure behind it. This is a logging road just below where this dam was built, and you can see the water flowing through here. And what happened, and this is really common in this situation, oftentimes you'll have a logging road wash out because for one reason or another during snow melt or sometime, and the beavers come in after the fact then and literally put their dams right next to, you know, upstream adjacent to the logging road and kind of patch it up naturally. So it's a good natural way of fixing our logging roads. But you'll see there's water flowing down through this washout, but it's not flowing over top of the dam. And that's an important point. We'll talk about that in a minute. So next we're going to go to look at this wetland on the left-hand side of the photo here. This is at the very tippy top of Bulgus Creek. And behind both these wetlands in the top of the photo is literally the peak of the southern ridge of the Pinocchi Hills. And this was the area, remember a few years ago, there was a large iron mining company that wanted to come in here and build an open pit mine, literally right at this location. And so that all would have been gone. There would have been an 800-foot hole in the ground just above these beaver dams. And actually in the proposal, they were proposing to cover this area that we're visiting today in this photo, that would have been covered with waste rock from the mining practices. So thankfully they decided it was not economical, and wetlands were a big part of the reason they left the area, but that's another story for another day. Also, if anybody wants to visit these areas, I do a lot of tours up here still, even though the mine proposal has been gone for a few years. It's such a good way of visualizing and seeing how wetlands and beavers are important for upper watershed water management. So let me know if you can get a group of people. I'd be happy to run you up in there. It's a pretty neat place. Now this is the beaver dam holding water right at the tippy top of Bulgus Creek itself. And this is I've taken so many people out to this wetland here. This beaver dam is it's at least 15 feet tall, maybe taller than that. It goes down into the trees where the creek starts. And earlier I said, notice that there's no water flowing over the top of these dams. Well, how is Bulgus Creek flowing if this is holding all that water back? We'll see in a minute where that water is going. But look at the construction of this dam. These things are incredibly complex. These beavers know what they're doing. They're putting mud in certain areas. They're using small branches and willows and different things to weave into the middle of it. On the top of the face of the dam, they oftentimes here, they've got pretty large logs that they're hauling up and putting over the exposed face of the dam. You'll even find rocks that they move. I don't know why they do it, but they put rocks on top of the dam as well. So if you've ever had to remove a beaver dam from a culvert or something like that, you really get a feel for how complex they are and how they use different materials in different portions of the dam. And they're very, very efficiently made. Now in this area here, they raise this dam. They've been raising it about 4 to 6 inches per year. So they're still rising the water here. It's really interesting. Come back year to year to this area, and the pond is larger and larger. So here we're standing on this dam, kind of panning over, and you can see some recently inundated trees, because they've got lots of branches on it. And then you pan back a little bit more and see the open water. And the hill right behind it is where the big mine would have been, the open pit mine. And you can see larger trees that have no branches left. That means that area's been inundated for a very long time. There's the Beaver Lodge right there. And moving across, and you can see some of the open water characteristics. And there's another couple of minor beaver lodges right here near the edge of it. And there's my daughter Allison and Bill Hart. Bill and I have been exploring these hills for many, many years now and spent hundreds of hours up in this landscape. He's been a great companion. We've been lost most of the time when we're up here. So I want to show you another important component of these beaver dams, and that's the diversity. Beavers are known as keystone species. They create habitats that are used not just by them, but by many other species as well. And you can see here, this is a photo, well, this is a video of a swan, trumpeter swan. Great success story in Wisconsin. We now have over 4,000 trumpeters nesting in Wisconsin, where they were close to extinction a few decades ago. And I'm happy to say my predecessor, Becky Abel, worked on the swan reintroduction projects back in those days. So very, very great success story. So let's take a look at this one here. I will say, you go up in these hills and every beaver dam that's probably bigger than 10 acres has a pair of nesting trumpeter swans on them. So let's see if we can get this video started. There it is, swimming around, and it's hard to see, but its mate was off on the right. We didn't see the young today, but there's been a pair of swans on this beaver dam ever since I've been coming there, and we've been able to document that they've been raising babies. So it's swimming across here, and it's going to go behind this beaver lodge. They're very secretive, and one of the real great benefits of a place like this is that there's very few people visit these landscapes. I'm probably about the only one that comes up to this beaver dam, and I only go up there once or twice a summer into this area. And we'll talk a little bit later about one of the reasons why so few people go up into this area. But it's important in Wisconsin and throughout the nation and world that we have wild places where people don't visit. We oftentimes want to love these places to death, and these swans exist here because they never see another human being. When we sneak up on this beaver pond, they hear us way before we're getting there, and they go way to the back end of the pond and trying to hide from us. So remember, we don't have to have trails and parks in every one of these beautiful places. We can have places that are wild that we visit very infrequently. There's also so many birds using the cavities in these dead trees, and incredible diversity in places like this. Let's see if I can get over to the next video. Get to see that swan twice. Oh, now it's going back there. Okay. So we talked earlier about why don't we see water flowing over the top of these dams? And the way these dams are constructed, it's amazing. This is Bulgus Creek, as I said, was a class 1 trout stream. And sometimes, you know, a lot of the trout people look at beavers and say, oh, beavers are bad for trout. Here's a situation where I say beavers probably couldn't exist in Bulgus Creek if it wasn't for the work of the beavers in the upper portions of the watershed here. The beavers build their dam, they hold water, they hold the cold snowmelt water back that otherwise would rush downstream and be lost very early in the year. Instead, they capture that water, hold on to it, and allow it to soak into the ground. And the water then, instead of flowing over top of the beaver dam, comes out at the bottom of the beaver dam. So here we are in this video, standing at the bottom of this about 15, 20 foot tall beaver dam, looking at the water expressing out cold, clear water feeding into Bulgus Creek during the very hot time of the year. It was about 90 degrees the day we're out in this area here in June. See if I can get my video to work here. There it is. So you see, this is just one of the springs coming out at the base of this dam. That's water that originated as snowmelt a few months earlier and now is coming out. And you're looking up, looking up, looking up, standing at the base of the dam, still going. It's way, way up there. So this is a tall beaver dam. I don't know how old this thing is. It's certainly decades old. Is it hundreds of years old? I don't know. So we'll climb up, and it's really treacherous when you're walking on dams like this, because these are pretty large kind of logs that they're using. You see how they put the logs on the face of the dam to armor it. And the jewelweed comes up every year. So we're climbing higher, trying to get up and look at the dam. In the background, of course, is where that big mine would have been. You can see the lodge. And if you put your hand in the water, you know, this open water is exposed to the sunlight, and it'll be warm for a few inches at the very top of the water, but once you hit about 3 or 4 inches down, it's ice cold water. So these things are slowing the flow, delivering a steady stream of cold water during the hot time of year when these trout streams need it the most. Okay, and I have to show this video because this happened a few minutes later. And this is another testimony to why we shouldn't be visiting these places too frequently. There's that swan. We disturbed it enough where it kind of got up and started to fly. So I had to show that picture. I just got mine up. And I put the camera away and it flew even closer to us after, of course, I had the camera turned off. So beautiful, beautiful, majestic birds. Let's see if I can get this next. Okay, well, let's go downstream a little bit and look a little more into the middle portion of the Bulgus watershed and talk about some of the floodplain wetlands. Now, a healthy trout creek and a healthy creek that's in balance with its sediment and its energy in this region, even though it's going down a steep slope, is a narrow and deep channeled stream. And you can maintain narrow and deep channels when you have abundant wetlands, when you're slowing the flow and able to spread that water out into the floodplains. That's a low energy situation. When we remove our wetlands and we remove the ability for the water to slow down and spread out, all the water has to go flushing through the channels all at once. And that creates a wider channel, oftentimes digging itself deeper and deeper and deeper. In other words, a big gully in this landscape. And that's not good for trout. All your water then goes downstream in the spring and you may be dry by summer. When you have the abundant wetlands, you're able to maintain these healthy channels. And the trout like these healthy channels because a narrow, deep channel has abundant hiding places and cool water and very high water table in those situations. And oftentimes in the middle portions of these watersheds, the channel will go through places like this. This is an alder thicket. And you'll hear me breathing in this video. It's really hard to walk through these things. If you've never walked through an alder thicket, I would really ask you, if you care about wetlands, experience what it's like to walk through an alder wetland. You step out and you can go up to your waist in water, and there's deep water, there's channels, there's pockets. It's just, it's a place to be experienced. And there's a lot of really good wildlife had in a place like this, and really good slow the flow possibilities here. So let's take a look at this alder thicket. You hear me breathing there. And to give a perspective on how thick it is, keep looking ahead. There's something out there, I think.
This way.
That's my colleague, Kyle Magiera, who's doing a lot of the work up in this watershed, building the partnerships for protecting these wetlands. Kyle's about 5 yards from me in this photo, and you can barely see him. That's how thick these areas are. And complex, there's dead wood everywhere, and it's really hard to navigate through these places here. But he finally made it. He's just about to me here. I had to cut it off there because it was so thick. He said a word that is not family friendly. So we'll go to the next video. And the next video we'll look at is just outside of this area, just downstream of the alder thicket is this very large grass sedge meadow, big flat area. It's probably at least 100 acres wide here, and very important mid-watershed area, big flat area where the water then that is coming down from above, even though it's being held back by the ephemerals, it's not as flashy as it was. When it does come down, it spreads out in an area like this, reduces its energy, cleans up, drops its sediment load, etc. So let's take a little look here. This is actually Bulgus Creek Channel in the middle of this sedge meadow. There's a little bit of alders running through it, but we'll look around and see what this landscape looks like. you could almost jump across this channel here. These sedges and grasses are more than head high, and you'll see a lot of things flying around the area here, and some birds in the background. Yeah, it bit me. I got bit by a horsefly there. One of the reasons that this area is visited so infrequently, I'll pause the video here for a second, is the abundance of deer flies and horse flies and mosquitoes, and certain times of year black flies. It's very oppressive. You saw my daughter had a head net on. Anyways, if you don't like bugs, don't come to this area. This is a flat portion in the middle part of the watershed, and the water comes through that alder thicket that we showed, and I'll show you where that is in a minute, and literally spreads out into this area here. So just on the left side of this tall stand of trees is where the channel enters this big flats area. And when creeks and rivers hit flat places like this, they become multi-branched. In other words, you'll have 3 or 4 channels running through this flat area that all run perennially. And the river just decides, hey, I can split up here. So you'll have multiple channels. Sometimes it's hard to even know which one is the main channel, if there is a main channel. And then at different elevations through the meadow, you'll see channels that flow during different flow events. So as the water rises, other channels kick in, and there'll be water flowing across this whole thing. There was water about 6 inches deep in this meadow as you walked through this. And this is a tussock sedge meadow with blue joint grass, and incredibly hard to walk through because every step you take, if you're not on a tussock, you go up to your waist in water. And then the tussocks are another 2 or 3 feet above you there. So you're almost sometimes crawling through a landscape like this. Very, very good for.
This is super fun, and I wanted to just let you know that our coffee break is turning into a lunch break here. So keep us along.
Yeah, this is the last video. Thanks for hanging in, folks. This is it. This is the channel. And so you'll see Kyle again standing here up to his waist in water.
Kyle. Hello,
and that's
Kyle.
it. So thank you all for visiting today. And if we have time, I'll take a few questions. And I hope you enjoyed a little video tour. Oops, there we go. That was the end of that. Through the Bull Gus watershed.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did, because I get to talking, don't I?
You do. You get to talk, and you got great stories and great videos to share. The good news is that we didn't lose anybody in the last 15, 20 minutes.
Oh, thanks for hanging in, everybody.
So we have a couple of questions, one of which you might have answered, but we'll just have you just reiterate. One of the questions was, streams are considered undesirable because they warm water temperature? Excuse me, beaver dams on trout streams. So tell us a little bit more about why that's not a concern, if that's not a concern, that beaver dams warm temperatures for trout.
And it's one of those things that it depends. You know, it's one of those things that depends on what's going on with the water, what's happening with the geomorphology. In many cases, especially in northern Wisconsin, what you'll get is the beaver dams will capture the snowmelt, and the snowmelt runs off the landscape, is captured behind the dam and holds up there, and then slowly is released through the ground towards the creek channel itself. And so what you're doing is storing cold water. When water goes into the ground acts like a refrigerator. We say cold water in, cold water out. So when water is getting into the ground and it's cold in these situations, then it works its way out. And it may, though it was, you know, the snowmelt may have occurred in March, it's finally being expressed through springs in the channel of the creek, oftentimes in June, July, August, or September, during the hot time of the year when the trout need that cold water. So you're storing your water in the ground. Some of it is stored above the ground in the dam itself, and the sun will warm a few inches of that water, but I've stuck my hands and gone into many, many of these dams. And once you get a couple inches below the water surface, that water is ice cold. So very important, not just the beaver dams, but all the ephemeral wetlands as well, because they're holding our water on the landscape and allowing it to work through the ground and be expressed into the creek later on during the hot time of year.
Super. Thanks, Tracy. And just a reminder, if you have a question, feel free to enter it in the chat box. We have one more question unless more come in, but how can we put upper watershed wetlands back in areas if we've lost them? This looks like a really healthy, undeveloped area of the state. I imagine it's a little trickier in other parts of the state.
Yeah, so a lot of the work that's going on right now in this region is looking at areas where we can restore, put wetlands back in these upper watershed areas and reconnect floodplains, especially in the areas up here where they have been lost. I like to show the Bulgus Creek because it's such a great example of a healthy situation. You need to see what a healthy situation is before you can, learn how to fix a messed up situation. And if you drive around, especially the agricultural landscape up there, you'll see at the tops of these watersheds little dimples in all these ag fields. And every one of these dimples has a little ditch running through them. So the water that used to be held in those watersheds now are drained out, because they need them for cropping, and enter these waterways. And the waterways are mostly eroded. They're gullies now. So the water gets up there, gets off the landscape, gets off the fields, goes into the gully, and it's off to the races, is flushed downstream. A lot of this erosion, a lot of this damage occurred way back when they originally clear cut the landscape up in northern Wisconsin. They removed all the trees. That caused some real problems and some washouts and gully formation way back then. So people see the landscape today and they think it's just a natural landscape. It's not. Those gullies are not natural. They're because we've altered the landscape and the way the water flows, and in part due to loss of a lot of these upper watershed wetlands. So finding the right places where we have the opportunities, and we can do this work in a way that maintains healthy agricultural landscapes, healthy forest landscapes. This whole area that we're seeing today is active, active timber production area for Iron County. So you can have human development, you can have things if you do it right, and put the right amounts of the right wetlands in the right locations. But it takes work and it takes an understanding of where the wetlands need to be and how can we work in these areas. When the big rains came across that landscape, $35 million just in public road damage in one rain event. So how can we then start utilizing wetlands and reconnecting floodplains to slow that water down so we're not having the infrastructure damage that's occurring every time we get a big rain up in this area.
And you've mostly been talking about the Superior watershed, but are these same concepts, do they apply in other watersheds in other parts of our state of Wisconsin and other parts of the Midwest?
Yeah, the great thing about Wisconsin is the state is so diverse. These concepts are true everywhere, but different watersheds have different characteristics. The geology, the geomorphology, the steepness, was it glaciated, was it not? But these general concepts all apply from one watershed to the other. And what's happened in Wisconsin and in the upper Midwest due to development was it was easiest to remove these upper watershed wetlands. So that's usually what went first. And then the floodplains got disconnected. And now we're flushing our water down our watersheds at a much faster rate than we ever have. And with that faster water comes a lot more energy and erosion and sedimentation downstream and all the problems that we have when we lose wetlands, besides the fish and wildlife losses that you have.
Sure. Well,
So,
this has been really fun and very interesting. It's great to be able to get a tour of these wetlands without the deer flies. And so we appreciate you affording us all that experience this morning. We invite all of you on today's call to come back again next week to learn about frogs from Rory Pulaski and learn more about wetland hydrology in a couple of weeks with Steve Gaffield on July 31st. As a registrant for this coffee break, you'll get an email from us inviting you to those so that you make sure you can sign up for anything you're interested in. We look forward to having you again. We're grateful to Tracy for being here today and sharing his information. And we wish you a wonderful weekend, everybody. Thanks so much for being here.
Keep your feet wet, everybody. Thanks for coming.